Thank you. Can you hear me from this? That's fine, is it? No. Can you hear me now? Right, it's just my voice will give up if I have to shout too much. I'm delighted to be here today and to see so many people. And I think, like Alison, I thought this would be a nice, comfortable, just a few people, but here we go. Before I launch into telling you about the Rape Crisis Centre, I just want to say a very big thank you to the Scottish Government for deciding to reform the Gender Recognition Act. Because if it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be here. And it brought me back into feminist activism after a gap of 40 years. There's not much we could ever thank them for, but we'll pretend that's one of them. So, how did this start? It started with, I was interested in the fact that women who had been raped seemed to have no support after the rape. And Glasgow at that time was not exactly the wonderful place that was full of feminist activity. In fact, it was a dearth of feminist activity. And I did try to find if there were any groups that would do that sort of thing. There were some horrific rape cases in the mid-70s that were reported in the papers. And the feeling that somebody needed to be able to help women was very strong with me. Couldn't find any group to do with women at all at that time. And then just a few months later, my sister-in-law, who took the magazine Spare Rib, any of you remember Spare Rib? I don't know if it's still going, said that she had come across an advertisement. Somebody in Glasgow was looking to see if any women would be interested in talking about rape and how to help rape victims. So it seemed as if it had been actually tailor-made for me, and there was just a first name, Sandy, and her telephone number in the advertisement. So I phoned Sandy, we talked for a bit on the phone, almost sort of doing that little dance that you do to suss people out, you know, what are your views, this, that, and the other. And that was fine. And she said, look, if you're interested, why not come along, and we're meeting at, and she gave me the time and the date, so in her house. And I said, that's fine. And on the appointed day, I went along. And all the way over, I was thinking, this is mad. This is the wrong time to be doing this. I don't know why I'm doing it. Everybody else there will know so much about this subject, and I know so little. Just a feeling I have that I want to do something. And then by the time I arrived, I thought, I'll just sit quietly at the back. I'll say nothing, and I'll make my decision after the meeting is over. Went in, met Sandy, sat down. We talked for a bit. After a while I said, how many other women are coming? And she said, oh, it's just Maggie who's coming. This was the other woman. And I said, are there just 3 of us? And she said, yes, there's just 3 of us. I thought there would be an army. So Maggie came in. She was an absolute force of nature. You couldn't be in a room and not know she was there. And she was very much a let's do this person. And she was well equipped with lots of information. In fact, she came in with bags full of, bulging with books and journals and all sorts. And that was great. We spent the whole evening discussing what we thought constituted sexual assault and rape. And that was quite an exploration for the 3 of us. So I went home absolutely buzzing. This was perfect. This was exactly what I was looking for. Other people that were enthusiastic, wanted to find ways to help women who had been raped. Because there was absolutely nothing in Glasgow at that time, or in Scotland at that time. what happened after that? We had to find ways of getting other women into the group because obviously the advertisement and spare rib hadn't worked. So we did word of mouth. I think that brought one person who was a fourth member. And then we hit on the idea of making up little cards and putting them into shops around certain places and see what would happen. Some shops absolutely refused to take the cards because it had the word rape on it. Rape was a bad word, a nasty word, not very nice, and nobody wanted to talk about it. So we still kept it as with rape on it, and we gradually got a few more people. Once it got to about 8 to 10 people, we moved from Sandy's house to my house, which had one bigger room, and we met there. And then I had to go and have my baby. That was 2 months later after that. By that time, there would be maybe 10, and by the time I got back to the group, which was a couple of months after I'd had the baby, there would be about 10, 15 people in the group. It was great. That was an army to me. That was wonderful. So we spent a lot of time on discussions about society's attitudes to women, and especially attitude to women who had been raped, because nice girls don't get raped. And that was it. That was the line that society took. And it was horrific. And then there were all the myths about rape. Women ask for it. The way women dress. Were they drunk? Were they flirting? Did they know this person? Why were they walking in a road at night by themselves? All of these things, and trying to really fight against the idea that it was all women's fault and men couldn't help themselves. That is what the situation was. Whether it is much further ahead nowadays, I'm not quite sure. Sexual assault, we believe, was on a broad spectrum, with perhaps something like wolf whistling at one end and rape, the ultimate attack, at the end. In between, there would be any unasked for touching or groping. But the mic. The hand one is better. Sorry. Right, can you, no? Is it on? Yeah, you can hear, sorry. Also, another thing that we discussed, no, they're not hearing. The green light is on, yes.
Test, 1, 2. Oh, I should be. Yeah, hold it close to the mouth.
Can you hear me now? Right. The police attitude to rape victims at that time was very much, if a woman had not put up a fight, then they didn't believe her that she'd been raped. She had to have the visible signs of attack and visible signs of the brutality of rape before they believed that she had been a victim of rape, which is absolutely appalling, because now we know that many women who are attacked freeze on the spot. And that is, I mean, it's not just women who do that. That can also happen to men who are being attacked. But for women, it was very often for women, they just froze. They couldn't fight back, and they were disbelieved. So their cases would never get to court. They would just be discounted. There was also the lack of any care for rape victims. For example, police involvement. we were quite keen to be able to take women to a police station to accompany them there. We thought that this was an important thing to do. All right. But as you can imagine, because of the reputation that police had, women were very disinclined to do that. We felt perhaps we should be able to accompany them to the hospital if they had to attend hospital for their injuries, or go to a doctor to discuss what tests they might have to have. For example, pregnancy testing, STD testing, and then ultimately, if their case came to court, then we would accompany them there too. All of these things were up for discussion. And as we got more and more women into the group, one of the things that was immensely interesting was that new people coming in brought new ideas, things we hadn't thought of, things that challenged our own views, and that was tremendously important, because you can go along with your views and you can talk to an echo chamber, and we know that now. We can see it. It's in action in Holyrood at the present moment, and that's why we're here talking. One of the other things that we had to discuss was how would we raise funds. Not sure we ever came to a conclusion about that one, because it was mighty difficult. We were just a group. We didn't have any status. Not very many people knew about us. And we were just there trying to work out where do we go from here. Things did happen. They did start to change, and that was pretty good. The first thing that we did was we drew up a list of places and people and organizations that we needed to contact, we would maybe come in contact with as the result of helping women. One of the places that we went to visit, or went, I would say visit, we went to have a meeting with the Glasgow Women's Centre. Anybody here from? Yep. And they were a good, strong group in Glasgow in the 70s. Now, I have to say we didn't really know very much about them. It was new people who were coming into the group who told us about them, and that was great. We thought, this is marvelous. Where is this? Why didn't we know? And we went to meet them. I think they were a little bit miffed about our group, because we were young pups that just sprang up out of nowhere, and we hadn't even come to talk to them in the first place. We didn't know they were there. But we hadn't come to talk to them. So the sort of start was a bit rocky, let me say. There were quite a few of us, and we were pretty scared too. And also, we didn't, because we had this belief in helping women who had been, and I use the word victims, and I apologize, I know it's survivors now, but women who had been raped. That didn't fit into any sociological philosophy or ideology at that time. So we were a bit odd. I think they saw us that way. We tried to explain that we were socialist leaning, and we had no political affiliations. But if they tried to say, well, are you feminists? We would sort of look at them and say, well, are we feminists? You know, well, yes, we're feminists. Because women, the word feminist, even in those days, was not particularly, wasn't always a good one. We were called women's libbers, and that wasn't a good word, or a good phrase either. And the meeting ended, and we were quite friendly with them, and that was great, and we were happy about it. And off we went. They actually were very, very good to us, and I can't praise them enough. From a very rocky start, we ended up good friends with them, and they were so helpful in the things we were doing. If we were making posters or banners, and they often let us work in their centre to do it. We also at that point discovered that there was a rape crisis centre in London, and that was the very first one in the whole of the UK. We were the second, but in the UK. But in London, they had just published their first report, and they had been open as a centre for about a year. I've still got that first report, and it's a bit battered now, but it was really interesting. We got in touch with them, I think initially by letter, phone calls, and then they sent us this report. And it was a helpful report because it let us see that we were on the right road, where the things we were discussing were the things that they maybe had gone through as well. So that was great. But they were so much further ahead of us that it made us see just how far we had to go and how much work we had to do. And the work we had to do very often was our own learning and our own reading and our own understanding of the topics. Sexual politics was a phrase that those two words put together don't really mean that much unless you get into the nitty-gritty of it and do begin to understand what sexual politics is all about and the imbalance in power between the sexes. So we were busy doing all of these things, reading, trying to get ourselves up to speed, and thinking of what we had to do to campaign, and thinking what we had to do if we were going to set up a rape crisis centre. We also met with lawyers. That was a bit far advanced for us, but we thought, well, we'll have them in the back pocket if we need somebody later on. We arranged a meeting with the police, which was something else, I have to say. The woman we saw was very stern and just dismissed what we were trying to do out of hand and said, there's no need for something like that. There's plenty around to help women. Wouldn't guarantee that, it wasn't even guaranteed. She just said, no, we'll not inform the police officers who are involved with women who have been raped. We won't inform them about you. But if you have rape victims coming to you, you must tell us about it, which of course was a no-no for us. Sorry, I have to turn my page now. The next, we had meetings with local MPs. We had a psychologist come along and give us some talks about how to help women who were suffering from the trauma of rape. Now, we weren't trying to set up ourselves up as counsellors. That was the last thing. We weren't counsellors, but we needed to know what sort of things to look out for and how to handle such situations. And that was really good. We got in touch with Citizens Advice Bureau, family planning clinics, young offenders units, and they were all, mostly I would say they were all very favourably disposed to us, and some of them were very glad we were there. Because we were hoping to become a charity, we developed a mission statement, and in that mission statement, what we set down right away was that this would be an organisation that was run by women for women who had been raped. And that was very clear in our mission statement. And that was there when we had our office, when we eventually got premises. That was what was in our office. We had we submitted our application for charity to the Charity Commission, and very glad to say that we got that. And so that was us getting well on the way to thinking, oh, it's time to go to big school now. We've got to think about actually getting premises and doing something about this, putting everything into action. One of the things that was quite important to us at that time was publicity. And Maggie was a Radio Clyde presenter, I see it's been written sometimes that she was a DJ. She would have been very annoyed about that if she'd been written. I was no DJ. She was a presenter. And she had a lot of contacts, obviously, amongst journalists and also in television. And I don't know if any of you remember a programme on BBC television many years ago called Current Account. Now, they approached Maggie and said they were very interested in doing a programme about her case, about the attack, because she was waiting for this case to come to court, but it was being constantly delayed for a variety of reasons. And they were very interested in that, and they also knew that she had been part of setting up this group. So they were really keen to do that, and they also wanted to know if members of the group would take part in this documentary as well. And after much discussion and toing and froing, some agreed to take part, others didn't, and quite understood that. And we made this documentary, or at least Maggie and the directors made the documentary. We were just add-ons, really. And that brought us so much publicity. It was terrific. And we, by the time we got this, we had our charitable status, and obviously we only accepted donations, and we had a post office box number, we had our charity status number, and a post office box number where donations could be sent. So we were delighted. There were other articles appeared in papers about the Rape Crisis Group, just gradually introducing the fact that we existed, what we did, what we were trying to do, what the aim was, and if women needed help, we were there. So that was great. We were going to be there, I should say. The next thing was premises, and one of our group members, the fourth group member, Liz Cooper, she knew the man who was the head of the Scottish Council for Civil Liberties. Now, I know that doesn't have a very good reputation nowadays, but at that time it was good, and the chap was a great guy. And she had been telling him we were looking for premises, we had no money, so we couldn't pay rent, and who was going to give us the loan of a room to start up what we were trying to do. And he said, well, as it happens, we've got a suite of offices and 2 of the rooms are empty. Do you want to come and have a look? And she said, but we have no money. Oh, that's all right. He said, well, we can sort that out. You won't pay any rent till you get donations, and once you get donations, you can pay your rent. Well, we'll make it about. And I think we ended up paying a peppercorn rent, really, to him, or to SECL. We went to see this. One was a very large room, obviously not as big as this, but it was a large room. And the other was a room at the back, which was a little office-type room, and that is where we had our office for most of the time. But the larger room could be used for a different type of activity. So we were delighted. We got a key to the premises, and now the crunch came. We actually have to do this. There's no more talk. Let's get it done. We set up a rota of 2 women, always 2 women to be in the office 3 evenings a week, something like Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and between the hours of 6 and 10. The premises were in Holland Street, which is at the lower end of Suckyhall Street, if anybody knows Glasgow. I think it's the far end. I think it's probably quite near the King's Theatre. I can't quite visualise it just now. Anyway, it was dark. It's a dark street at night and in winter. It does lead on to Suckyhall Street at one side, and I can't remember the name of the other street on the other side, but it wasn't brilliant. The lighting in it wasn't great either. But since nobody else was rushing to offer us premises, we decided that this is lovely, this is great, yes, we'll do that. So we developed that rota, and we wanted to keep the address very quiet, and we didn't want people to know where our address was for our protection and for the women's protection as well. And I think, as I recall, initially when we were to see women, we arranged to meet them somewhere away from the office. And then once we had met them and verified who they were and we were comfortable with it, we would take them back to the office. Obviously, they knew what we were going to do. So that was fine. The importance of confidentiality it can't be overstated. We had to keep the women's confidence. We had to let them know that what they told us would be confidential, that we weren't going to be discussing it with anybody else. If they didn't want to go to the police, we wouldn't force them to go to the police. But all the things that I mentioned earlier that we'd been discussing about what we were trying to do, we were going to try and put into action. We were going to accompany them to the hospital, accompany them to the doctor, any of the other things that we talked about. And we also were very aware that as women ourselves, we would have a pretty harrowing time of listening to women who had been raped, and that was something we needed to be very, very careful about. What do we do? Do we take that on ourselves? Do we keep it into ourselves? And so what we set up was a way of being able to talk with one another without disclosing any of the confidential information, but we were able to talk with one another and not just unburden, but to share, and for somebody else to listen and also to help if we needed help with a particular situation. After the police had said, or the police, she was a chief inspector that we met initially, had said no, police would never help us at all. I was in the office one night, and obviously the lights were on and shone outside, and police officers that were passing came to the door, rang the bell because it was a close bell. And I went to the door and they said, we're just passing and we see there's a light on here, who are you and what are you doing? And so we explained who we were and what we were doing, and could we just come in just to check? It's quite important we check that there's nothing untoward going on. So they did that, and we offered them a cup of tea, sat down, had a chat, and that turned out to be absolutely amazing because they couldn't believe what they were hearing, what we were trying to do, and what our thoughts on rape were, rather different from theirs. They challenged us, we challenged them, but that came to be, I wouldn't say a regular occurrence, but obviously word had got round them that they could get a cup of tea with us, but for the price of a cup of tea, they also had to stand up to what we were talking about. So it was win-win. And they took our number, and as they were leaving, they said, I wish we had known about this a few weeks ago. We had a terrible case, and just people like you to help the woman would have been wonderful, just to have a phone number to give her and to tell her to go along. And that was lovely. The fact that I still remember it, it was lovely, it was heartening and so on. They also said, sort of thing you're telling us about should be taught at Tullyallen, the police training college. I don't think it ever has. Things did change over the years with the police because I had quite a lot of contact with them afterwards in other areas, and they had changed quite considerably. You might not think so, but compared to what they were like initially, they had changed quite considerably. Now that's as far as I'm going to go with the setting up of the Rape Crisis Centre. I don't know how much time, am I all right for time? Yeah. All right. I'll just do a run through. I want to touch on the GRA and rape crisis. There was no such thing as transgenderism in the 1970s. I mean, it wasn't an issue, it wasn't thought about, wasn't known about, and we didn't think about it. And as I said earlier, our founding principle was by women, for women. No men were going to be allowed on the premises during the time we'd be seeing rape survivors. And that was adhered to. Obviously, if any workman had to come in for any reason, we would arrange a time and make sure no women would be there. But since we were mostly seeing people in the evening, that was fine. But that was our rule. Anybody picking up their partner or their wife or whatever, they had to stay outside and in their cars. They were not allowed over the doorstep. Now, the part of the GRA that's problematic for us is gender self-ID, where a man who says he's a woman will have access to women's single-sex spaces, which is what the rape crisis is and should be. I think most of us will agree that a centre that deals with traumatised women, women who've been attacked and raped, should not allow any men anywhere near women in any dealings with women. That's how we set it up. And everybody in the group agreed with that. When we set it up, it was unequivocal. The Scottish Government doesn't see it that way. And the men who say they are women, even without any form of surgery or hormone treatment. And there's beginning to be more evidence coming along of women self-excluding from the Rape Crisis Centre and from Women's Aid. And that is absolutely appalling, because they are so fearful of meeting men who are the embodiment of their attacker, standing in front of them, asking them questions, or sitting in a talking group with other women who are talking about the trauma they have experienced. It's not on. It isn't on. And that is why women have talked with their feet and they've walked. And that is wrong. Women started these centres. We worked extremely hard. I ate, lived and breathed rape crisis for over 3 years. We had to learn everything we possibly could about rape and its effect psychologically and physically on women. We didn't have rich backers who could just come and wave a magic wand and suddenly we had beautiful premises. Everything was cobbled together. We used our own money to pay for things like rent. We used our own money if we were making flyers or posters or cards, and with the help of the Women's Centre very often. I don't regret one single moment of it. I would do it again, all over again in a heartbeat. But what I will not accept is that men can walk in and take over an organisation that was made by women for women. Now, I'm not speaking on behalf of anybody. I'm just me. I'm just speaking about this myself. And my opinion on this now is that Stonewall and trans organisations should be setting up rape crisis centres and domestic violence centres specifically for trans people. And they should be employing people who have the knowledge and expertise that's required. The effect of the trauma of rape on men, on women and men, is far too serious an issue for politicians and Stonewall to use for political kudos. And shame on them for doing it. Thank you.